In the Wild Wasp Tales, if you want to go get your stuff done and I will be there in about an hour, or short searching tag leak KR, do you want to go get your stuff and I can get you, want to come over for a bit? I like subscribe watching from. Let's get started. He didn't expect the moment to unfold this way. When she whispered for him to wait because they needed to take it off, the rancher hesitated, unsure what she meant. But the quiet strength in her eyes told him she trusted him far more than she trusted her own body at that moment. He knelt beside her slowly, careful not to startle her. The barn around them was silent except for the soft rustle of straw beneath his boots. She breathed in shallow gasps, clutching her side as if holding herself together. He saw the fear in her trembling, but also an unspoken plea. When his hand reached toward the torn fabric of her dress, he felt her tense, and he paused instantly. She didn't pull away. Instead, she looked at him, eyes wide and vulnerable, silently urging him to continue. Her nod was calm, but it carried the weight of desperation. He swallowed hard, feeling a sudden heaviness in his chest. He wasn't prepared for the way her trust affected him. He had patched up injured animals, wounded ranch hands, even himself, but helping her felt different. It felt personal, delicate, like any wrong move might shatter something invisible between them. She kept her gaze steady on him as his fingers slipped beneath the edge of the torn cloth. The fabric was stiff with dried dirt and sweat, sticking painfully to her skin. When he tugged gently, she winced, biting her lower lip so she wouldn't cry out. His heart sank at her pain. He spoke softly, promising to be gentle, though his own voice shook with nerves. She exhaled shakily, bracing herself as he continued loosening the stuck fabric. Her skin underneath was bruised, swollen, and scraped raw. He saw the injury clearly now, ugly, deep, and far more serious than he expected. She had pushed herself too far trying to escape whatever danger had chased her here. Now she lay helpless on the barn floor, trusting a stranger to help her when she needed it most. The thought overwhelmed him. Her life had collided with his suddenly, violently, and now he was responsible for her. He worked with slow, steady hands, peeling the fabric away bit by bit. Each tug revealed another mark on her skin, scratches, cuts, bruises shaped by branches, rocks, or worse. She tried to stay still, but sometimes her breath hitched, and her fingers gripped the straw beneath her tightly. He murmured reassuring words, telling her she was doing well, telling her she was safe here. She didn't answer, but her eyes softened each time he spoke. She seemed to draw strength from his voice, clinging to it the way someone clings to a lifeline in deep water. When the final piece of fabric came loose, he felt as though a weight lifted off his shoulders. But at the same time, a strange weakness washed over him. Not from the work he had done, but from the raw humanity of the moment. Her pain, her trust, her closeness, it all hit him deeply. She lay still, breathing heavily, looking at him through strands of loose hair. He saw gratitude there, but also uncertainty. She didn't know him, didn't know if she could rely on him beyond this moment. And yet she had allowed him near her when she was at her most vulnerable. He dipped a cloth into cool water and gently placed it against her bruised skin. She flinched at first, but quickly relaxed as the relief spread through her body. Her eyes fluttered closed for a moment, and he watched the tension melt from her expression. It made him want to protect her even more. As he continued cleaning her wounds, he tried hard not to let his thoughts wander. She was strong and brave, yet hurting in ways he couldn't fully understand. He wondered what had happened to her, who had chased her, and why she had been running alone through the wild terrain with no help. She opened her eyes slowly, studying his face as he worked. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. He felt the weight of her gaze, almost as though she was trying to read his intentions, searching for something steady and dependable. He hoped she saw honesty in his actions. She tried to shift her leg slightly, but the pain was too sharp, and she gasped softly. He steadied her without thinking, placing a hand on her shoulder to keep her from straining further. She looked at him again, startled by his instinctive gesture, then relaxed beneath his touch. He told her she needed rest and that he would carry her inside the ranch house where she would be safer. She didn't respond immediately, as if the idea of relying on someone felt foreign. She had survived on her own for so long that trust did not come easily to her. Still, she nodded faintly, agreeing without words. He slid an arm beneath her back and another beneath her legs. When he lifted her, she instinctively reached toward his shirt, gripping the fabric tightly. Her hold wasn't strong, but it told him how scared she truly was. He carried her with slow, careful steps across the barn floor, mindful not to jar her injuries. She lay against his chest, breathing unevenly but no longer trembling as she had before. He felt her weight, light yet significant, like he was carrying more than just a body, he was carrying her fate. Outside, the sunlight was warm and gentle. The wind rustled the grass, carrying the scent of dust and hay. She watched the scenery passing slowly, her eyes half open, as though seeing the world differently from his arms. Maybe she felt safer now, or maybe she simply had no strength left to resist. He opened the ranch house door with his shoulder and carried her to the spare room. The bed was plain but clean, a far better place for healing than the barn floor. He lowered her gently onto the mattress, her fingers releasing his shirt only when she felt the softness beneath her. She looked up at him again, exhaustion dimming her eyes. For a second, he thought she might speak. Instead, she simply breathed deeply, letting the comfort sink into her bones. He pulled a blanket over her legs and adjusted the pillow beneath her head, doing everything he could to make her comfortable. He sat beside the bed, watching over her, refusing to leave her alone until he knew she was truly safe. She drifted between consciousness and dreams, her breathing gradually settling into a calmer rhythm. He felt relief knowing she was no longer in immediate danger. The more he watched her, the more he realized how deeply this moment affected him. He had known hardship, loneliness, and long nights working under the open sky, but he had never felt this kind of responsibility before. Something about her drew him in, a quiet bravery hidden beneath pain and exhaustion. She opened her eyes one last time, meeting his gaze with a fragile sort of trust. He saw gratitude flicker there, soft and sincere. And though she said nothing, he understood her meaning. She had placed her safety in his hands, and now she was asking him without words not to let go. He promised her silently that he wouldn't. She closed her eyes again, letting the last of her tension slip away. As he sat there beside her, the room quiet and warm, he realized that helping her had changed something in him too. Her vulnerability had uncovered a gentleness he rarely let himself feel. He leaned back in the chair, watching over her as she rested. The world outside remained harsh and uncertain, but in this room there was something softer, something beginning. He didn't know what would come next or how long she would stay, but he knew one thing with certainty. He wasn't leaving her side. He hadn't expected a simple act of helping her to reach so deeply into him. When he lifted the torn fabric and saw the hidden injury beneath, he finally understood how long she had suffered alone. The realization made his breath falter, as though the pain she carried was suddenly pressing on his own heart. The wound was more than physical, it was the story of a long journey of fear, running from danger she had never asked for. Seeing it made him feel strangely hollow, as though all the strength he'd built over the years as a rancher wasn't enough in this quiet, fragile moment. She lay still, watching him with tired eyes, trusting him in a way few ever had. That trust held him firmly, like a weight across his chest. He wanted to be careful, gentle, reassuring, yet his hands trembled slightly as he worked, not from fear of failure, but from the emotion she stirred. Her breath hitched as he cleaned the wound, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she endured the discomfort with a quiet resilience that humbled him. He realized then that she had been carrying this pain far longer than he initially thought, pushing through every step because she had no other choice. He told her to breathe, offering soft words meant to ground her, and she listened. Her fingers curled into the blanket, gripping it tightly at times, then releasing once the pain eased again. He saw in her movements a life lived in survival mode, always alert, always expecting her. So did something more vulnerable, an unspoken relief that she finally didn't have to fight alone. He didn't know how to respond, so he simply held her gaze gently. He dipped the cloth into clean water again, wiping the dirt from around the wound with steady hands. Her breathing slowed, and the fear in her eyes dimmed. He sensed she was closer to safety, closer to calm, simply because someone finally cared enough to help her without expecting anything in return. She shifted slightly, wincing but not resisting. He adjusted the blanket and told her she was safe here. The words felt powerful, more meaningful than when he had said them earlier. She needed to hear them. He needed to say them. In that simple exchange, something unspoken formed between them. The ranch house was quiet except for the soft creak of the wooden floor beneath him and the wind brushing lightly against the windows. He stayed close, watching for any sign of worsening pain. She kept her gaze on him, as though he was her anchor to the present, the one steady thing she could trust. He wondered what she had endured before arriving here, how many miles she had run, how many nights she slept in fear, how many times she had forced herself to be stronger than anyone her age should ever have to be. At just 25, she had survived what most people never faced. He continued tending to her, moving slowly so he wouldn't disturb her injury. Every time she winced, the ache inside him deepened. He wished he could undo the trail of hurt she had walked through, erase the fear etched into her muscles, and give her back the peace she had been denied. When the bandage was finally secured, she relaxed visibly, exhaling a breath she'd been holding for too long. Her shoulders dropped, her jaw loosened, and her eyes softened in a way that made him feel protective without hesitation. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, careful and gentle. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the relief settle in her body. He watched her chest rise and fall, steadier now, and felt a swell of pride that he had managed to help her. Not as a rancher, not as a stranger, but as someone who cared deeply for her well-being. She whispered a soft thank you, barely audible, but it struck him harder than he expected. Her voice, fragile yet sincere, carried a depth of emotion he hadn't anticipated. It made him realize how much this moment meant to her, how significant it was that she trusted him enough to lean into his help. He told her she didn't need to thank him, that anyone with a beating heart would have done the same. But she shook her head gently, disagreeing. Not everyone would stop to help someone they didn't know. Not everyone would stay, or kneel beside a stranger, or ease their pain with so much care. He didn't argue. He simply nodded, accepting her gratitude even though part of him felt he didn't deserve it. Her acknowledgement warmed him in a quiet, unexpected way. He stood to fetch fresh water and a clean cloth, but paused when he saw her hand reach slightly toward him. She wasn't asking him to stay. She didn't need the reassurance spoken aloud. But her small gesture told him that his presence mattered. So he stayed. He sat back beside her, placing the cloth on the nightstand, and waited until her breathing softened into something close to rest. The room felt different now, still quiet, but warmer, gentler. The energy had shifted from fear to safety, from tension to fragile peace. He looked at her resting form and realized that helping her had changed him more than he expected. Something inside him had softened, opened, connected. He reached for the lantern on the bedside table, dimming the light so she wouldn't strain her eyes. She murmured softly, adjusting her position to ease pressure on the wound. He lifted the blanket slightly to ensure it didn't press too hard, then settled back into the chair beside her. As the minutes passed, the exhaustion that had washed over him earlier settled deeper. It wasn't weakness, it was emotional weight. Seeing her pain, her courage, her trust, it had drained him in a profound way, leaving him humbled. But he welcomed that feeling, because it meant she wasn't alone anymore. She drifted into a light sleep, her breathing steady. He stayed awake, keeping watch as though guarding something precious. The night air grew cooler, but he didn't move. He felt responsible for her in a way that surprised him, responsible not just for her safety, but for her peace. In that quiet room, her presence stirred something inside him, something protective, steady, and painfully honest. He didn't know what the future would bring for her or for him, but he knew one thing clearly: she deserved safety, healing, and rest. And he would make sure she had all three. He leaned back slightly, still keeping his eyes on her. The ranch outside stretched endlessly, but his world in that moment narrowed to this single room, this recovering young woman, and the silent promise he unknowingly made to her. A promise to help, to stay, to care, without expecting anything in return. He exhaled softly, letting the weight of the moment settle fully. The exhaustion in his body wasn't from the work of his hands, it was from the depth of feeling he hadn't expected to give. Yet he didn't regret any of it. He looked at her once more and whispered the only truth he knew. She wasn't alone anymore. So did something more vulnerable, an unspoken relief that she finally didn't have to fight alone. He didn't know how to respond, so he simply held her gaze gently. He dipped the cloth into clean water again, wiping the dirt from around the wound with steady hands. Her breathing slowed, and the fear in her eyes dimmed. He sensed she was closer to safety, closer to calm, simply because someone finally cared enough to help her without expecting anything in return. She shifted slightly, wincing but not resisting. He adjusted the blanket and told her she was safe here. The words felt powerful, more meaningful than when he had said them earlier. She needed to hear them. He needed to say them. In that simple exchange, something unspoken formed between them. The ranch house was quiet except for the soft creak of the wooden floor beneath him and the wind brushing lightly against the windows. He stayed close, watching for any sign of worsening pain. She kept her gaze on him, as though he was her anchor to the present, the one steady thing she could trust. He wondered what she had endured before arriving here, how many miles she had run, how many nights she slept in fear, how many times she had forced herself to be stronger than anyone her age should ever have to be. At just 25, she had survived what most people never faced. He continued tending to her, moving slowly so he wouldn't disturb her injury. Every time she winced, the ache inside him deepened. He wished he could undo the trail of hurt she had walked through, erase the fear etched into her muscles, and give her back the peace she had been denied. When the bandage was finally secured, she relaxed visibly, exhaling a breath she'd been holding for too long. Her shoulders dropped, her jaw loosened, and her eyes softened in a way that made him feel protective without hesitation. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, careful and gentle.